The final nail in the coffin that was the biggest collapse in Philadelphia Eagles history and maybe NFL history was led by Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense. We're about to recap a blowout 32-9 loss in the wild card round. The Eagles fall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We thank you so much for tuning into this one, and you have to be mentally strong to tune into this one because that was demoralizing, watching the Eagles fall to finish their 2023-2024 season. 32-9, the final score in Tampa Bay. The Eagles lose their final six of their final 7 games to close out the year. God. And again, what was, to me, not only the biggest collapse in Philadelphia Eagles history in a single season, but maybe the biggest collapse from a supposed contender I've ever seen in a single season in the NFL. And I don't think, Gino, that's being extreme. And I think if we had one key takeaway from this game, the defense did not look good for a lot of it. The tackling was awful, but the final nail in the coffin of this year was an offense that had an opportunity 2 minutes to go in the third quarter, only down 16-9 when they had no business even being in the football game, having an opportunity to come back and win. And Jalen Hurts failed this team. The offensive coaching staff yet again failed them for all the same damn reasons, and they just couldn't do it. They looked dead, and I hate that I built myself up and built some sort of hope over the last few days because they've been dead for months, and they showed that today. They were a walking corpse, and that is so disappointing, and just that's the story of this year, though. And again, I would say that's not who they've been over the years, which is true, but that's exactly who they've been all year this year.
It's the hope that kills you, as cliche as it is, and I'm with you. I think a lot of us thought it's one last chance, man. Like the Cowboys, they lose last night. You're thinking
that's what did it, man.
Is there any chance of hope? And no. And if you bought into them after the last 6 weeks, it would be insane. And a lot of people in the beginning of the season, they were saying, "Oh, this team's fraudulent. This team's fraudulent." Well, at the end of the day, folks, hey, they are what their record says they were. And that team after Thanksgiving, they were a god-awful football team, to put it lightly. And I think tonight was just a final encapsulation of really what it was, man. Like James Bradbury couldn't tackle to save his life. He just looked like he was so disinterested. The offense didn't convert a third down.
They were 0 for 8, Gino, until the second last drive,
which they picked up via a penalty, if I'm not mistaken, either. And coming into this game, and the last thing you see is Jason Kelce walking off the field emotional. You knew if you were going to play for anything that hopefully it was for those guys. Team's dead. Team
didn't seem like they cared at all.
They were that piece of roadkill that you're like, when are these guys going to pick this up, dude? Like this thing got hit weeks ago, just been lingering around here. Flies are lingering around it. It stinks. And that was the Eagles, man. And I said to you before we hopped on here, it kind of felt like we were reading of Mice and Men, and you kind of know how that ends. It's like it sucked, but you're like, oh, all right, we never have to revisit this again. We know that this thing got taken out to pasture, and that's really what the 2023 season felt like because, hey, San Fran broke them. After that game, they weren't the same football team, Lou, and tonight it was just like, Tampa Bay, they played a good game. They played a good 60-minute football game. The Eagles did nothing. Situationally poor. Quarterback play was poor, had no balance when it came to play calling. Defensively, even when they got stops, the offense couldn't do anything with it. Even Britton Covey was fumbling the football when it came to special teams. I think the moral of the 2023 season, Lou, and if you're going to just put a bow, like you're going to take this box and put it aside, like when you're in elementary school and your mom takes all your crappy pieces of art and puts them together. What is this 2023 season going to be? The season that the Eagles fumbled away. They had everything in their grasp. They had everything to play for. They had their destiny right in front of them. And like you're playing Mario Kart, They got hit with that blue shell. Then they slipped on a banana peel. Then they got hit with a red shell. And all of a sudden they lose 6 of the last 7. We're talking about a team that could potentially fire their head coach, who was a couple points away from winning a Super Bowl about a year ago. You're going to make multiple changes at the coordinator positions. You're going to have a lot of change in terms of personnel. It's going to be a different team. And tonight it was evident, Lou, changes have to be made.
It has to be. And the thing is, you can understand the personnel issues that they just can't overcome, and you can understand how this team would fall short schematically, but I just never thought they would mentally break the way they did the final few months of the season, where they had no fight left. When you look at the makeup of this team, what you thought they were with the veterans they've had and the young players that come from these big schools, winning cultures that we thought this was the most mature team we've ever seen, one of the closest teams we've ever seen in franchise history, for them to break the way they did after that San Francisco game, and to see Jalen Hurts shaking his head over and over again every single play that, by the way, a lot of them were his fault, is just so disappointing. And that's the thing, man. Like, you can't blame just Jalen Hurts for this collapse. You can't just blame one guy. It was a complete team collapse. But today especially, though, again, like, this defense tackled horribly. The middle of the field was wide open. Matt Patricia just felt like he had no plan. James Bradbury keeps coming in and out of the lineup for Keely Ringo. They had no idea what they wanted to do there. Avonte Maddox is playing safety because Reed Blankenship's gone. Like, there's just no synchronicity for the defense on all 3 levels from communication. Like, it was a mess. But with all that being said, like, the pass rush actually did wake up today. The defense was holding on. You're heading into the fourth quarter, and you only have allowed 16 points. All week we were saying the Eagles are probably going to need to score 30-plus to win this game. That wasn't even the case. You just needed more than 16 to have a lead with 1 quarter to go.
Couldn't even get double digits.
They couldn't even get double digits, and that's the thing. Like, this game, again, I'm not going to say the collapse, this suddenly isn't a giant statement about Jalen Hurts, but because the coaching was awful on offense today. But Jalen, despite his injury, I think he was terrible. He looked like 2021 Jalen Hurts, and this may have been a worse performance. This is why they paid you for this type of moment. And, you know, all week we were saying you have to be special probably to win this game. That wasn't even the case, and he just needed to be okay. He needed to be just good to have a shot, and he wasn't even that.
I'm not going to put all the blame on one person at all. On offense, it is just a complete downfall of what we knew a year ago when you had Shane Steichen and you had this offense that at will could rattle off 30-plus point games. And to your point, Lou, we're not even saying that you need it. We said the other day, yeah, like if you get 30, you're going to win this game.
Right.
But what you just said, you needed 16 to even be in this game.
You just needed the Hurts from the first Giants game. Like, that's a nothing quarterback. That's fine. And that's all you needed.
And a lot of those things that we had talked about just continued to come to light. And right before halftime, it was like that's when I knew they lost that game. They have over a minute and a half, all the time in the world to go down the field. And it just looks like they had no want or rhyme or reason to get that offense on track to go down there and potentially tie that game when it was right there in your grasp. And this team, it's been dead on offense, man. There has to be a lot of changes and find out whatever the root cause is. If it's Nick, see ya. If it's just Brian, see ya. If it's Jalen not trusting them or figuring out what happened to Jalen down the road, you have to figure it out. There is something wrong with this offense, and we've known that for weeks now. And we were just hoping and praying that it was going to get better. No, there has to be legitimate changes now because right now, you can do that. The season's over with. You can fire whoever you want. Jeffrey Lurie, he looked like the Grim Reaper walking down.
He looked dead,
into the locker room.
Yeah, looking at him in the press conference in the press box, it looked like he wanted to completely blow up this team and
get everybody out of there. Yeah,
that was the most unprepared playoff team I've seen from an offensive standpoint. It wasn't, again, just Jalen Hurts was bad in this football game.
You were right with 2009, man. You were so bang on with that comparison.
It felt like exactly the same vibe. You knew Tampa Bay was going to come in with a blitz-heavy approach. And even early on in the game, you have multiple back-to-back 3rd and 2s, and you're running only vertical routes an empty set, despite no A.J. Brown, a hurt Jalen Hurts, and Devontae Smith, an elite offensive line and running back, DeAndre Swift, that were actually moving the ball pretty well early on. You completely abandon the run game. Like, you have isolation routes, no motion, no anything. I mean, it was
nothing, dude.
That's the thing. It's the same damn things over and over and over again. That's why, to me, at the end, I'm like, I was trying to convince myself. Maybe you keep Sirianni if you win this game. But even if they would have won that football game, it would not have been because of coaching. It would have been because of personnel. That the fact that they could not fix these what feels like simple issues, or just try different things to try to fix these issues for 2 months tells me, I don't know. I've lost the trust of this coaching staff, and we'll get into that in the next segment, Gino. But before we get deeper into it, I think there needs to be significant change, even if it's not Nick Sirianni going, which I'd be okay with at this point. The rest of the coaching staff, it has to be a massive overhaul.
There's a point when embarrassment just gets too much.
Yeah.
And when they showed one of the Glazer brothers, who happens to be one of the owners of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who also happens to be one of the owners of Manchester United, which is one of the most poorly run clubs in the Premier League right now, and he is clapping on your grave. On your grave. Things need to change. And there's a saying that a lot of clubs sing in soccer when they know that a manager is going to be fired. It's called "you're getting sacked in the morning." Nick Sirianni, that might be running through your head in the morning, my friend. This was the ultimate letdown, Lou. If you wanted to see a team not play for their coach, that's the example right there.
Against a 9-8 team, this is not like you're playing San Francisco or Dallas or any really legit team that's been good all year, and you still got completely boat raced. And the fact that they were 10-1 at one point this year, and here's where we ended the season. We've been through some crazy Eagles seasons together. This is the most bizarre I've ever been through. Should it result in a complete overhaul of the coaching staff? We'll get into that coming up next. It's the Locked On Eagles postgame show, 32-9, the final score. Stick with us.
Today's episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Now that the Eagles season is over, go check out the Sixers, go check out the Flyers. You're going to enjoy those games, and you're only going to get your tickets at the one place that we rely on here at the Locked On Podcast Network. That is Gametime. And why do we love Gametime so much? Well, you can go on your phone and you could literally see, without even having to tap into the ticket, what your view is going to be. They have deals going on right up until the time of the game and even after the game. And if you find tickets that happen to be for less in the same section and row, Gametime will credit you up to 110% of the difference. To get in on the action at Gametime, download that app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download that app, use the code LOCKEDON, get $20 off your first purchase. Go check out the Sixers, go check out the Flyers. Gametime, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is also brought to you by Jase Medical. We know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk just for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade, which is scary. Can't imagine a more helpless feeling than a family member getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication that they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. So visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medication will then be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use our offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Once again, that's jasemedical.com. Use our code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, want to let you know Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Gino, heading into this football game, again, there was a lot of talk about potentially changing things up next year for the Eagles, and rightfully so after this massive collapse. You had lost 5 of your last 6 heading into the playoffs, and now 6 of your last 7 getting blown out on the road against, to me, the other worst team in the NFC playoffs that, I mean, again, probably is better than you at this point, but still nothing to be terrified of. And you got completely boat raced. And so for me, again, I've been going back and forth with the should they fire Nick Sirianni in 2024 conversation. But after seeing that game, after seeing how unprepared they were and how lifeless this team looked, I think they need to fire their entire coaching staff. Again, that was I said it earlier on in the show, that was the biggest collapse, maybe not only in franchise history from a supposed contender, but in NFL history. I've never seen an 11-win team look like a title contender with problems, but still a title contender so quickly. For them to turn into a bottom 3 team that's been dead for months is unbelievable. And I just think the Eagles staff, this brass of Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, they have fired guys for a lot less, including their last coach in Doug Peterson. And I know Doug had a 4-win season, but I think what happened this year with Nick Sirianni is worse. And hearing the stories today that came out from ESPN and the Inquirer, I just have lost pretty much all faith that he's going to be the guy to turn this around next year, whether it's quote unquote fair or not for him to lose his job after 3 years.
Is it fair? I don't know, but Jeffrey Lurie holds his team to a very high standard.
He said that about Doug when he fired him. It said it technically probably wasn't fair for Doug to lose his job.
And if you look at just overall wins and like record, and you want to look at it that way, he has quite literally the best winning percentage of an Eagles coach in the first 3 years ever. Right. But to contextualize what has happened over the last 8 weeks is something that, if you're looking at it on a graph, it's such an outlier to any other season that you have seen. Not just like you're saying in Eagles history, but in NFL history, where a 10-1 team, how many times does this happen? Go and look on any NFL sports and information
almost
system.
Never.
It's probably happened maybe once, maybe twice, that a team has gone from a 10-1 team, not solidifying home field in the playoffs, not even getting one home playoff game, then going on the road and getting blown out 3 times over by a team that didn't even win 10 games in the regular season. That has quite literally never happened. And how does Nick Sirianni bounce back from that? How does anybody in that locker room that is tied to Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, which we know aren't going anywhere, i.e. Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, the young core that is there, it has to be the coaching staff, in my opinion.
And the thing is, I mean, you read the stories today about how players just stopped trusting these coaches a while ago, and you can see that on the field. Like reports were that Sirianni would overrule Brian Johnson's play calls at times. Players wouldn't know who was calling the plays during games. You know, you see the story too with Jalen Hurts. He hasn't been happy for months, apparently, that he feels like they've been relying heavily on the vertical game. And he's absolutely right about that there's been a disconnect between your franchise quarterback, your play caller, and your head coach. Like, if you're a head coach like Nick Sirianni, who's supposed to be a distributor, right, of responsibilities and a rah-rah culture guy, and he's not a play caller, and you're failing so miserably in these other areas, it's like, what are you doing for this football team?
Yeah,
that should
what
have
exactly do you do here?
Exactly. Nick? What do you do here that's going to make me believe you can turn it around, to the point where I'm reading these stories before this game, Gino, and I'm starting to think, hold on, is Brian Johnson not the problem? Is it Nick? Is he overruling Brian? If you're going to just call the plays, why don't you just call the plays? And yeah, those stories were damning. And then to see this performance after those stories, I'm like, I don't know how you come back from this.
That's the thing. What is the way forward for this football team and for Nick Sirianni? That I don't really know. And we kept saying each week was rock bottom and rock bottom and rock bottom. Right. Like, this has to be it. Like, what is the way forward with him? And is it giving him another chance to make the decisions to bring in coordinators, which he didn't go outside of the building and want to bring anybody else in when it came to an offensive perspective. When it came to the defensive perspective, he made a decision now, looking back at it, putting Matt Patricia in charge. Talk about an all-time scapegoat move. There's going to have to be some serious root cause analysis of why things played out the way they did after that Buffalo Bills performance. Because before that, I don't think it really matters. Because the last thing you saw, the recency bias, was the last 8 weeks. And what has happened, Lou? an all-time implosion. This outlier has to be scrubbed from existence. And could it mean Nick Sirianni being sacked? It 100% could be. Is Jeffrey Lurie someone who has fired more established head coaches for less?
Yeah.
100%. And if you've subscribed to the show and listened to us the last couple of weeks, we've said exactly that. And it's a crappy industry for that reason, but a business is a business. And when it comes to making money and losing money, Jeffrey Lurie went from a guy who's saying, oh, I'm probably going to get at least one, if not two games held at Lincoln Financial Field in the playoffs. That's some additional revenue. Wrong. You don't get one. Two, oh, maybe some miracle we can get an additional playoff game. Wrong. You lose in the first round. Everything in front of Jeffrey Lurie, that money that he was looking for, is gone. And when an owner sees his money light on fire in front of his face, things are going to change, Lou.
Yeah.
And I could see that happening within the next 24 hours, if that's the case.
Again, if you zoom out and you say you fired a guy for 3 winning seasons in the playoffs, a Super Bowl appearance, then an 11-win season,
it would look terrible.
How can you do that? It would look terrible, and it would look embarrassing for the Eagles. But when you actually add context, I think this is more justifiable to fire Nick Sirianni than it was firing Doug Peterson, even after a 4-win season in 2020. Again, it's tough to lose coordinators. It's tough to replace a Shane Steichen, or I don't want to say it's tough to replace Jonathan Gannon, but they did so bad replacing Gannon. Like, Matt Patricia was worse. I think even Sean Desai was worse. But it should not make or break you as a head coach like it did. It broke Nick Sirianni, Gino, when he lost those 2 coordinators, far more than even, people get on Doug Peterson so much for his coordinator decisions. And I think it's totally correct. Like, he, hiring Mike Groh and then Press Taylor, it was a mess, but it did not make him as useless as it has Nick Sirianni. Doug Peterson was still a good play caller to me, overcoming a lot of adversity in 2018 and 2019 to make the playoffs, whereas Nick is the one causing the adversity more than, to me, anybody. And yes, Howie Roseman has a lot of blame in this for the defensive personnel. Jalen Hurts has a lot of blame for his play down the stretch and the turnovers and the penalties.
Right, it's everybody.
It's everybody, but I don't like to scapegoat one guy, but Nick Sirianni's the head coach, and most of the problems in this collapse, I think you can point to him. So if, gun to my head right now, just an hour after this game ended, I don't know if, I'm not going to say they're going to fire Nick Sirianni, but I think they should fire Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, if there's a betting favorite on any of the system and the checks and balances, which is the owner and the GM versus the quarterback and most of the personnel.
None of those guys are going anywhere.
The coaching staffs change all the time, man. Like, look at college football. Those guys get new jobs. Their clothes go right to the Goodwill, and they get on a plane and, Gino, they'll never be seen again. They do it in the NFL all the time.
And Brian Johnson, by the way, is getting head coaching interviews. What if you lose Brian Johnson, then do you trust Nick Sirianni? Well, yeah, exactly. But do you trust Nick Sirianni if you lose Johnson to pick a new play caller, or is he going to take over play calling duties? Do you trust him to pick a new offensive coordinator and then have Sirianni call plays? I don't know if there's going to be a plan that he can pitch to Lurie that, I don't know, he's going to believe over the alternatives.
Yeah. Whatever he sold him a couple of years ago, I think that leash has ran out, in my opinion. And it's had to, because these guys you're not going to tell me this team all of a sudden became terrible. It doesn't happen.
Again, from who they were, I just refuse to believe it.
6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, if you want to put it that far. I mean,
it's not like they were 7-3,
they scored 5
even,
touchdowns
7-4
against the Bills, Lou.
Yes, you were 10-1.
Really good just 3 hours before you played that game, and
you can't overlook that.
You cannot overlook how far the personnel came, and Jeffrey is going to put a couple gold stars next to Howie's name for that. Is it fair as opposed to how much he's going to favor decisions that the coaching staff's made? That's up to you to decide, but we know how Jeffrey Lurie likes to do it. Like you said, gun to your head, an hour after your game, what's going to happen? I think it's going to have to be a change in the guys calling the plays, because the things that happened in the beginning of the season that we were talking about in the first week against New England just still happened. They didn't have answers for the blitz. They were too concerned about throwing these screens that just never worked.
It ended the way it started.
Balance. Yeah, they were who everybody was trying to tell us that they were, and we just didn't pay attention. So we apologize to all of you who we were trying to say were frauds, but yeah, they are frauds, and that's exactly what happened.
They were And just what a sad way to go out potentially for some all-time Eagles. We'll get into that coming up next as we wrap up the recap show. 32-9, the final score of the Eagles season comes to a close in Tampa Bay. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season's over. It's playoff time, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. I'm really sorry if you placed a moneyline bet on the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday night. Again, you're gonna get, if you keep betting on football, $150 back in bonus bets, win or lose. So if you bet on the Eagles, you still get that money. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. All that and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. Again, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Our final recap show of the 2023 season for the Eagles. It comes to a close in the way that we've expected and the way it's been ending for the last 2 months, just in blowout, embarrassing fashion with little to no fight from most of these players, little to no answers from the coaching staff, and a whole bunch of questions for the owner and the GM this offseason. And I know we've been talking about it, and it's been a slow death this year, but, even Joe Buck and Troy Aikman were talking about it at the end of the game, talking about the Super Bowl last year and saying how this team a year ago was in one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. And yes, there was a lot of turnover, especially on defense, but there are so many players and coaches still from that team that are with the team right now. And to see where they are just a year later, after going toe-to-toe with the greatest dynasty in the NFL since the Patriots and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, to now being blown out again in Tampa Bay like it's 2021 all over again. Yes, we've been through some insane ups and downs with the Eagles, some of the most unpredictable, unique stories in the history of sports. But this one, I can't wrap my head around. It just feels like a complete fever dream from where we were a few months ago.
Remember when I was talking about on the show the other day when we started with our plot point and we hit the climax of what was the Super Bowl, and this is the moment. This is the end. This is the end of the tale, Lou. Whether it's the chapter of Nick Sirianni, whether it's what began in Tampa, what ended in Tampa, whatever this last 2-year period was, it came and ended in the exact same fashion.
Like, how was a Super Bowl year sandwiched in between 2021 and 2023
against That's the most
Philadelphia Eagles
in the same
thing
environment with the same discussion points after the game? Is Sirianni,
I can't believe it.
The guy going forward is Jalen Hurts, the quarterback. It's
right.
The same stuff, man, and it's funny. And other franchises and other fan bases are gonna laugh, but like, folks, we go through quite literally. What is the movie? Was it Shutter Island, where he just goes through the same thing and he finally realizes, like, oh, this is what it is to be insane. Like, yeah, that's what we do. We are Eagles fans, and we go through the same thing over and over again. And here we are again with a season that is so similar to 2009. And do we have a Chip Kelly situation on our hand? Do we have a Doug Peterson situation on our hands? Do we have an end of Andy Reid situation on our hands? It's all full circle. It all just comes around and goes around, and it's all the same thing over and over and over again. And that's the great thing about it. But at the same time, it's just sickening because you kind of knew that it was coming. And if you followed this team long enough, you knew that this was the inevitable.
It was in the back of my head, even heading into the season. I'm like, this feels like for the first time in a long time, the Eagles have the recipe. They have the blueprint. They have the quarterback, the young pieces on both sides at the most important positions. I felt like they had the coach, Howie Roseman. I this time trusted could sustain this roster. It just felt like they finally had it figured out. Because even after 2017, me and you, we talked a lot about those runs in 2018 and 2019, but we knew like that probably wasn't a dynasty. This team, I thought they can be like the early 2000s Eagles. But in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, but are you sure? Because that's not how this has been your entire life. And you're like, what if it happens again? And it happened again. But it took 11 weeks, though, for them to – it wasn't like 2018 where you knew it was coming all year long, 2019, 2020. This one was to me, just so much more unexpected than anything I've ever experienced as an Eagles fan. And it just is so saddening, too, to see some of these guys have been through all these ups and downs, like Jason Kelce, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, have the game of their life, and then this might be the way they go out. That's the most upsetting part is you have all these guys that are some all-time franchise greats, and the team just did not show up for them today. Those guys, though, I'm proud to say they were the ones that showed up. Like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham on defense were incredible, and hats off to both of them. And Jason, I hope at least a few are back next year because they're still so instrumental to this football team.
I think we could say that in a good way, there are some guys that they may have played their last game and they may have deserved it in Philadelphia, like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, like you had said, Lou, even Jason Kelce. I thought those guys played exceptionally well tonight. I mean, Fletcher Cox just shows up time and time again. So does BG. But in another sense, there's guys like Quez Watkins. I hope I never have to play another football game for the Eagles. And I hope they can figure out their linebacking situation, and something has to change at safety. And a lot of things have to change for this Philadelphia Eagles team, man. But
didn't think that was going to be the case, man. The fact that we're going to come up with a plan all offseason and talk about fixing this football team is not where I thought we'd be.
It felt like you just climbed Mount Everest and you were so close, and you're just like, all right, we tumbled down like a couple 100 feet. Let's sit here on our lawn chair for a little bit. And then where you were sitting on that lawn chair just slipped out from under you, and this entire season just went right back down to the bottom, and you're here back at square one. Hopefully in those seasons that have gone bad, Lou, they have turned it around in the blink of an eye. But, man, things have to change quickly, and we'll see over the next couple weeks what it's going to take. What is that level for the Eagles to have to get back to? And here we are, man, talking about another Philadelphia Eagles team. How's that 2024 team going to be different than 2023 and 2022 and teams before this? But hey, maybe we're talking about something different in 2026, Lou. That would be great.
Final score 32-9. The Eagles 2023 season comes to a close. A lot of questions, a lot of podcasts coming up for you over the next few months. We're still daily, Monday through Friday. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Thanks so much for sticking with us through such an up and down year. It's going to be a fun offseason, though, Gino, no matter what, right? I mean, the talking points are going to be great.
We're not going anywhere, and that's the sick thing about it. And it quite literally is like Shutter Island, but instead of the decision to where he gets a lobotomy at the end, we're just going to do it all over again next year, and we're going to be talking about it. How does this team get better? But there's only one place to do it each and every day, 5 days a week, Lou. We're going to be doing this again in 12 hours from now. Make sure you subscribe. Follow us along on Twitter. We're always going to be talking about it. But, hey, at least go get some freedom and a breath of fresh air from this 2023 season.
Yeah,
it is over. It is put out to pasture. You no longer have to deal with this toxic team.
Once again, thanks so much for tuning into Locked On Eagles. Want to let you know again, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. So Locked On Sports Today, they're still here for you 24/7, covering the other top sports stories of the league with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go, Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.